Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to this special event hosted by the North American Spinal Cord Injury Consortium. I'm Jen French, and it's my pleasure to moderate this session today. So this is the first time that NASCIC is doing this. So we welcome your feedback on this and your opinions on how it went, as well as any suggestions that you might have for what we can do in the future. So today, we have a very special guest with us, Dr. Melissa Miller, and we're going to be talking about the tips and tricks for applying for the DoD Spinal Cord Injury Research Program. And we have some special announcements today as well. So next slide. Just a little bit about our agenda so you can know where we're going. So we're going to do a little introduction about NASCIC for those of you who are not all that familiar with the consortium. We're going to hand it over to Dr. Melissa Miller to really talk about the program and her tips and tricks for the SCIRP program. And then we're going to leave it open for Q&A for the audience. So that's your opportunity to ask the program director questions directly. So we welcome you as while she's going through this presentation to put your questions into the chat box. We will get to those as well as we'll use the raised hand feature at the end too. So next slide. So the North American Spinal Cord Injury Consortium, we were formed in 2018 as a grassroots effort of bringing the entire community of spinal cord injury together and wanting to be more active in unified efforts initially related to research. We have a broad group and a lot of different memberships, if you will. So we have community-led organizations, about 52 that are members today, about 260 individuals with spinal cord injury. And we also have this unique group called the partner members, and we have about 60 of those. Those are other stakeholders within the spinal cord injury community. So it could be research institutions, researchers, scientists, industry, health providers, you name it. We are looking for those partners to be involved in our community as well. So really our mission is focused on unifying our achievements through research, care, cure, and policy, and supporting collaboration across all of our stakeholders within the spinal cord injury community. And we really focus on identifying the gaps and communicating resources and being a conduit for collaboration. Really, we call ourselves those that connect the dots. So we want to make sure that our stakeholders are all talking amongst each other so we can improve the lives and the research that we move forward for spinal cord injury. Next slide. This just gives you a little idea of our principal members. So our principal members are organizations that directly represent people living with spinal cord injury. We have several of them across the board. We know we have more work to do, but it just shows you the breadth of the organizations that believe in our effort and that we need to work together to collectively move spinal cord injury forward and spinal cord injury research forward. Next slide. I know I mentioned our partner members, and those are all the other stakeholders, including many of you on this call. So if you haven't become a member, please do so. But this will give you an idea of some of the other organizations that have joined along with us into the consortium and work together with us actively. Next slide. So think about becoming a member. Not even think about it. Why don't you go ahead and become one? So we have our link there. If you go to nascicconsortium.org and go to membership, membership is free. So it just takes a little bit of time to fill out the application form. It doesn't cost you anything, but we promise you will be a wealth of knowledge and connection to the spinal cord injury and within the stakeholders of the spinal cord injury community. Thanks, Jessica. She just put that link in the chat. So if you want to go ahead and link to it, that would be great. So with no further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Melissa Miller. She's the program manager for the congressionally directed medical research program for spinal cord injury, but also for epilepsy research. So she's responsible for spending those taxpayer dollars and making sure they go to the best efforts forward for not only SCIRP, but also the epilepsy program, and really focusing on strategies to improve health and wellness, not only for service members and veterans, but also other individuals that are living with the condition. And particularly our topic today is spinal cord injury. So prior to her position, she had a large portfolio across the research spectrum for within certain areas of not only spinal cord injury, but traumatic brain injury and cancer. So she has a wide breadth of experience. Also, before joining CDMRP, she was involved in drug development and really researching the ion channels physiology. She has a Bachelor's of Science degree in biochemistry from Seton Hall, and also has her PhD in cellular molecular medicine from Johns Hopkins University. And she did her postdoc at UC Berkeley. So she's got the scientific background and the demeanor to be our program manager. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Melissa Miller. Dr. Miller?
Thank you so much, Jen. I'm going to just share my screen right now. Get it up and running. Are you able to see that? Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for coming, and I really want to say thank you for the NASCIC leadership who is graciously hosting me for this. And I also want to thank their incredibly talented staff who have made this webinar possible and will be sharing this out afterwards. I'm hoping that we can get through this fairly quickly. I want to really allow time at the end of this for questions because there's not a lot of opportunities for you all to talk with a program manager here at CDMRP. So so hopefully we can just, fly through this and then we'll get to your questions, which may be the most important part. So I'll start off today with a brief introduction to the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs, or CDMRP, to highlight some of the elements that are unique to this organization. I'll move on to an overview of the SCIRP program, focusing on the current priorities for the upcoming FY22 funding cycle, and then do a bit of a deep dive into our funding and application submission process, noting those tips and tricks for successfully navigating these stages. And then finally, I'll leave you with some resources that you may find useful if you're considering applying to CDMRP funding opportunities. Okay, so what even is CDMRP? We are the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs, which is an office within the Department of Defense and specifically sits as part of the U.S. Army Medical Research and Development Command. So we're within the Army. CDMRP is the office that implements and manages funding for biomedical research programs that are directed by Congress, and we also help to execute some of the core DoD medical research program areas. The CDMRP was established through a grassroots advocacy effort, which heightened awareness for the need for targeted research into specific health issues. And it's because of the tireless efforts of patient advocates and consumers that Congress appropriated funds for the first CDMRP program and continues to appropriate funds for additional CDMRP programs. As a result of initial and ongoing success, new programs, we have a hot mic, thank you. So new programs have been added to CDMRP over the years. While individual CDMRP programs are unique in their focus, all of our programs share the common goal of advancing research that will lead to healthcare solutions for service members and the American public. So although all of the research that CDMRP funds must be relevant to military health, unless specifically stated within the funding opportunity, it's not required that your research employ a military or veteran population, nor is it a requirement that you collaborate with military or VA researchers, though of course, such collaboration is certainly encouraged. There are a number of features that make CDMRP unique from other funding organizations, and I want to take a minute to highlight some of these differences here. So each CDMRP program, as I said, is specifically added to the DoD budget by Congress, and each one is called out with its own funding line, meaning that those funds are intended only to support research under that program. This makes our programs not only very mission focused, but also topic specific. So for SCIRP, over 90% of funds from Congress go directly to spinal cord injury research. CDMRP funds high impact and innovative research. Well, sure, who doesn't? But this is important to state because impact specifically on the people in need of healthcare solutions is really at the heart of all our programs and is a major factor in the review process. Our litmus test for impact really comes from the involvement of consumers and people with lived experience throughout our entire program process, from application review to development of our investment strategies. So, people with that lived injury or disease experience will be weighing in on our program priorities as well as reviewing application submissions to evaluate how well research addresses the needs of that community. So, to balance the needs of Congress, the consumer community, and the research landscape, CDMRP programs adapt their investment strategies on an annual basis to ensure we're addressing and responding to the most current and forward facing stakeholder needs. This means that funding mechanisms, application requirements, and program priorities can change from year to year for a given program. It is therefore really important for you to pay attention to the intent of the award mechanisms to understand what the program is soliciting in the current year. And finally, CDMRP follows a two-tier review application process. So with no standing peer review panels, panel membership is dependent on the types of applications received for that year, and the makeup of the panels changes from year to year. This two-tier review process means that there's no pay line, and applications that receive the highest scientific scores are not automatically funded. Applications are recommended for funding based on both their scientific merit and how well they address programmatic criteria. For FY22, this upcoming grant cycle, CDMRP will manage 35 programs, which is over $1.5 billion of taxpayer money that we will be stewarding. I'm here to talk about the spinal cord injury research program, which is highlighted in red, but CDMRP has other programs and topics that SCI researchers may be interested in, such as our chronic pain management program or our peer-reviewed medical research program. The PRMRP, the Peer Reviewed Medical Research Program, supports research in congressionally specified topic areas that address a wide range of fields. This is the list of the FY22 topics within PRMRP, and those topics highlighted in yellow are those that are also relevant to the SCI community. All of this is to say that although I will be speaking specifically about SCIRP today, CDMRP has a lot of topics relevant to the SCI community that I would also encourage people to check out. That being said, let's focus now on the spinal cord injury research program. So based on language provided by Congress, SCIRP strives to be a traumatic SCI research and treatment program with a focus on regeneration, rehabilitation, and long-term care. Our mission at SCIRP is to fund research and encourage interdisciplinary collaboration for the development and translation of more effective strategies to improve the health and well-being of service members, veterans, and other individuals with spinal cord injury. So what does that all mean? It means that our focus is on the individual. And with everything we fund, we ask, how will this help someone with a spinal cord injury? And although projects funded by SCIRP must be relevant to military health, there is no requirement to involve injured service members or veterans in your research study. For the upcoming grant cycle, SCIRP has a $40 million appropriation, which we will use to fund studies through specific funding mechanisms, which are released through our program announcements. And I am happy to report that for FY22, the SCIRP program announcements just went live, like Friday. So they are on grants.gov. And I can let you know that May 23rd will be the pre-application deadline for SCIRP. with a full application deadline of September 2nd. Pre-applications are a required element of the submission process, so you will need to submit by May 23rd if you want to be considered for the FY22 grant cycle. For FY22, SCIRP challenges the research community to advance the development or translation of healthcare solutions for people living with SCI. We also allow for innovative research that fosters investigation into new areas of research, but projects that solely focus on target identification are discouraged. The chart on the left side presents the historical SCIRP investment across the research and development continuum. Essentially, as the research matures, our investment grows. SCIRP tends not to fund research strictly within the basic science or discovery phase, and primarily focuses its investment on translational and clinical research. It's also important to note that SCIRP encourages research across the continuum of care, from time of injury throughout the lifespan. And we have a fairly significant investment into topics relevant to chronic spinal cord injury, as you can see on the right side. This year, SCIRP is employing 3 funding mechanisms: the Investigator-Initiated Research Award, Translational Research Award, and Clinical Trial Award. Within each mechanism, we also offer an early career partnering principal investigator option. The IIRAs are our mechanism to support impactful science at any stage from basic through translational research. Clinical trials are disallowed in this mechanism, and studies focused exclusively on target identification, again, are discouraged. Our TRA supports translational research that will accelerate the movement of promising ideas into clinical application. We try to apply a broad definition of translational research here, and applicants are encouraged to view translational research as a reciprocal flow of ideas and information between basic and clinical science, and not simply a one-way continuum from bench to bedside. The TRA also allows for a pilot clinical trial to be proposed as part of the funded research that will be used to inform the next step in the continuum of translational research. So finally, we have the CTA, which supports the rapid implementation of clinical trials. There is no limitation on the type of intervention that may be evaluated with the CTA, provided, of course, that it's applicable to one of the SCIRP focus areas, which we will get to those in just a minute. But importantly, proposed projects may range in size from very small pilot trials to demonstrate feasibility through more advanced, complex, large-scale trials to establish efficacy of an intervention. The dollar amounts listed on this slide indicate the maximum direct cost allowable for proposals under this mechanism. But to be clear, there's no requirement that you request the maximum direct cost for a particular funding mechanism. That is, if your proposal can be completed with less funds. Hopefully, you can appreciate that each of these funding mechanisms cover particular sections of the research and development continuum, with the IIRA, TRA, and CTA building off of one another. It will be up to the applicant to select the appropriate funding mechanism that best fits their project and stage of science. In an effort to promote enhanced research capacity within the SCI field, the FY22 SCIRP funding mechanisms also include an option for an early career partnering PI. Exercising this option will allow for 2 PIs to be named on a given project, one of which must be within 10 years of their terminal degree. Each of these PIs will be named to an individual award. So they are sharing a project, but they are responsible for their own separate awards. It's our hope that by offering this option, The program encourages meaningful and productive collaborations between investigators. These last few years have been particularly difficult for early career investigators, and the SCIRP program wants to ensure that these researchers are not lost from the field. Okay, so to meet the intent of the award mechanisms I just described, applications must also address at least one of the FY22 SCIRP focus areas listed here. SCIRP uses focus areas to target research funding into the highest program priority needs. For FY22, the programmatic panel identified 5 key priority areas, which include preserving and protecting spinal cord tissue at time of injury. So this is really looking at the acute injury phase and the protection of tissue within the cord specifically. The paucity of SCI specific biomarkers was also identified as an area of critical need. So we're requesting projects for the identification and validation of biomarkers for diagnosis, prognosis, and evaluation of treatment efficacies. This year, we're also prioritizing secondary health effects that occur as a result of spinal cord injury and are asking for projects that aim to discover, test, and validate promising interventions to address bowel, genitourinary, neuropathic pain, cardiopulmonary, or autonomic dysfunction in people with SCI. Fourth is our psychosocial focus area, which is looking for projects investigating psychosocial issues relevant to people with SCI, their families, or their care partners. To be responsive to this focus area, psychosocial issues must be the primary focus of the research, and studies addressing social isolation, loneliness, and depression, as well as resilience, self-efficacy, sexuality, and intimacy, as well as interactions between people living with SCI and their care partners, are especially encouraged. These are the types of projects that we're looking for to fit under this focus area. Finally, we have rehabilitation and regeneration, which is looking to solicit projects aimed at maximizing the function of the residual neurocircuitry. This is a list of priorities that span the injury spectrum from acute to chronic and call out research areas of highest need, not only within the field, but also of highest need to those living with SCI. One other thing that I want to point out for FY22 is that SCIRP will continue to require the involvement of people with lived SCI experience as part of the research team for our Translational Research Award and Clinical Trial Award mechanisms. CDMRP has involved consumers and people with lived experience throughout the review and investment strategy development process since its inception. But the SCIRP programmatic panel recognized that there was a gap in consumer involvement at the planning and implementation level of the research we were funding. To address this, we asked that research teams implement a collaborative research approach that establishes and utilizes effective and equitable collaborations with SCI community members to maximize the translational and impact potential of the proposed research. If you've applied to SCIRP in the past or have participated with us in the past, we've called these community partners skills or SCI lived experience consultants. But what we've learned over the years of implementing this requirement is that there are many ways to integrate the voice of the consumer into the project. And therefore, this year, we're using broader terminology to describe these relationships and allowing research teams to employ the collaborative research approach that best suits the proposed project. For some projects, a one-on-one consultation relationship that a skill can provide is what's needed. while other projects may want a more diverse input and will opt for something more like a community advisory board to provide advice and consultation throughout the planning and implementation of the research. Ultimately, what the program wants is that SCIRP funded research be responsive to the needs of people with SCI, their families, and their care partners. And we feel that by being less restrictive in how researchers and people with lived SCI experience may collaborate, we can foster non-tokenistic involvement of SCI community members within the research teams. So now we'll change gears a little bit and talk about some strategies for success, starting with giving you a better understanding of the application submission process for the SCIRP program. Everything about our program process boils down to this one slide, which shows a graphical depiction of our program cycle and awards management process. Everything is pretty much contingent on funds from Congress. And at the beginning of the cycle, we hold a vision setting meeting where the program convenes a panel of experts, so scientists, clinicians, and consumers, to help us identify the gaps in the research field and set the goals and investment strategy for that year. This determines what type of funding opportunities we offer that year, and those funding opportunities are made available through our program announcements. All of our program announcements require submission of a pre-proposal, which are screened by the programmatic panel to select those ideas that best meet the goals and intent of the funding mechanism. Those that are invited to submit a full application then proceed on to our two-tier review process: scientific peer review, followed by programmatic review by the programmatic panel. After programmatic review, funding recommendations are generated and submitted for final approval. As I've mentioned, CDMRP employs a two-tier review process for applications. Overall, the goal of the two-tier review process is to develop funding recommendations that balance the most meritorious science while offering the highest promise to fulfill the programmatic goals. Applications must address these two elements to be successful. Peer review is the first tier. It's criteria-based and evaluates individual applications on scientific and technical merit. It's from this review that a summary statement is developed to inform the next level of review. And the summary statement is also submitted to the applicant so that they can better understand how their application was evaluated. After scientific peer review, applications go to programmatic review, which is a comparison-based process. During this review, panel members are asked to recommend applications to fund. The programmatic panel members compare these applications against one another using specific programmatic evaluation criteria to recommend, well, a broad portfolio of grants that reflects the investment strategy for that particular program cycle. That being said, just because your application scored well at peer review, it does not guarantee that it will be recommended for funding. It must be scientifically sound and meet the specific needs of the program. So everything you need to know about a given funding opportunity is included in the program announcement. This includes the peer review criteria for your full application. I recommend that you look these over as you prepare your full application submission so that you're aware of how your application will be assessed and scored. These criteria guide the peer reviewers in their evaluation, so it's in your best interest to write your application to clearly address all of these points under each review criterion. If we are asking the peer reviewers to evaluate something, then there is a corresponding component of the application package where you should be addressing it. Make it easy for the peer reviewers to find the info they need to evaluate your application. Speaking of the peer reviewers, it's also important for you to understand who will be reviewing your application. SCIRP peer review panels consist primarily of scientists, clinicians, and people with lived SCI experience. or consumers. We may also invite specialty reviewers in for certain mechanisms or focus areas like biostatisticians, bioethicists, tech transfer specialists, as well as regulatory specialists. You can find lists of past peer reviewers on the CDMRP website. Like the peer review evaluation criteria, the programmatic review criteria are also outlined in the program announcement. For SCIRP, our programmatic review criteria generally looks like something like this, where the programmatic reviewers will assess the intent or how well the application meets the intent of the award mechanism. They'll also look at the relevance to military health. So be sure that you clearly document the potential implications of your scientific research project on the military. They'll also look at portfolio composition. Programs like SCIRP will not fund poor applications, but if there's a choice between two applications of equal scientific merit and one is in a topic area that has already has a lot of strong projects and one is in a less well-supported topic area, then that can be a factor in the funding recommendation. And relative impact, again, for two projects of equal scientific merit, if one would have more of an impact on the target population, this can be a factor for programmatic reviewers when they're deciding which projects to recommend for funding. And just to note, programmatic panel members are also listed on the CDMRP website, and there's a link available on the SCIRP webpage to identify those. So now let's move on to the application submission process and break down what exactly is in a program announcement. So this slide is sort of a flow chart of the application process, which utilizes a number of acronyms, the key for which is included at the bottom of this slide. So all program announcements for CDMRP, including SCIRP, employ a two-step submission process. The first is a pre-application, which is submitted via eBRAP. And the second is submission of a full application, typically via grants.gov. But if you're associated with a military treatment facility or research lab or military research lab, you would submit a full application through eBRAP. This chart highlights that both the PI and the business official have roles to play in this submission process. So it's important to work with your business official before you plan to submit your pre-application to make sure that the account registrations are good to go. And pre-application submission is mandatory and has a deadline. So be sure your submission is on time, as there is no grace period. If you are invited to submit a pre-application, you will then want to coordinate with your business official for a smooth and on-time submission of the full application package. They will be the ones to handle the upload of your full application materials. So be sure to provide them your final documents with enough time for them to submit and meet the deadline. Some of you may have heard me say that this application process is two-step. But you may also notice that there is a third step listed on this chart. This is the verification step to ensure that the application package that was submitted is complete and accurate. It is highly encouraged that you have your business officials submit full application materials ahead of the deadline so that if changes need to be made, you can do so to any of your uploaded documents. However, there is also a verification period, usually lasting between 3 to 5 days after the submission deadline, that will allow you to go into eBRAP and check the contents of your application package. If modifications are needed to be made because maybe one of your attachments is incorrect, you can make that change during this window. However, you may not make changes to the project narrative or budget at this time. Those changes can only be done in grants.gov. And before I move on, I just want to say that I cannot stress enough how important the verification phase is. I have seen too many applications need to be withdrawn or score poorly because somewhere in the upload process, application materials got switched and Dr. A's attachment 2 materials were submitted in place of Dr. B's. This can kill an application and it could have been caught and fixed during the verification window. So please do take advantage of it. Unlike other funding agencies you may have experience with, program staff at the CDMRP cannot provide feedback or guidance on any aspect of your proposal. So funding opportunities are written to include the specific wants and needs of the program. These can be found here in the program description section of the announcements. Other important elements include the submission due dates, which you can find on the first page of the announcement, the application content, and the peer and programmatic review criteria. It says it here on this slide, but I will say it out loud. The single most important tip I can give you is to read the announcement carefully. It has everything you need to develop a successful application. Now, how do you even read this thing? It's incredibly dense and maybe you just don't know where to start. My suggestion is to break it into 3 sections. The first area I would suggest you concentrate on consists of the 4 sections listed here. This includes the program description, which introduces you to the program. You'll find information about what the current goals of the program are, what is specifically encouraged or discouraged by the program this year, and this section will help you determine if your project is a good fit for SCIRP. Next, we have the focus area section, which not only lists the focus areas as I presented them to you today, but also includes additional explanatory language to highlight important considerations about each of the focus areas. The award information section provides critical information about the intent of the funding mechanism, and the eligibility information, well, that's exactly what you would expect it to be. It outlines who is eligible to be named as PI and apply for the mechanism. This section together is important to establish the foundation for your application, to ensure that you are eligible to apply and to make sure that your project fits with what SCIRP is looking for that year. The next section is the application submission information. Both steps 1 and step 2 are important. These are your instructions for how to write your application. This section tells you exactly what you should address within either your pre-application for step 1 or your full application for step 2. And then finally, we have the application review information that lists what the review criteria is for applications submitted to this mechanism. Again, this is how the peer and programmatic reviewers will assess your application. So you'll want to make sure you address all of these points. Other areas you may want to be familiar with in the program announcement include the funding restrictions, which not only list what your funding limits are, but also include what should or should not be budgeted for. You also may be interested in understanding what the reporting expectations will be for a given funding mechanism. Last is the administrative actions. This section often only becomes relevant when you get into trouble, but this section lists the reasons an application may be flat out rejected, modified, or withdrawn. It may be worth it to skim this section just to make sure your application doesn't meet any of these criteria. Last tips I want to share with you are 4 things to avoid when submitting an application. Do not include current programmatic panel members on your proposal. This is grounds for automatic withdrawal. As noted earlier, you can check who the current programmatic panel members are via a link on the SCIRP webpage. Do not exceed page limits, as additional pages will be removed, so the reviewers will never see them. Don't miss the submission deadlines. Our deadlines are posted at the time of program announcement, when the program announcements are made public, and these deadlines are fixed and do not allow for a grace period. Finally, and I cannot stress this enough, please submit the correct project narrative and budget for your proposal. These are the only documents that cannot be changed during the verification period. And as silly as it sounds, it happens. So please make sure that it doesn't happen to you, because it is heartbreaking to have to withdraw an application that submitted the incorrect budget information or project narrative. Okay, so this last section should go pretty fast. It is really just pointing you to some resources that may help you if you're considering applying for CDMRP funding. First, I'm going to point you to the SCIRP webpage. This is updated throughout the year with information about funding opportunities, research highlights, or other publicity documents, as well as external links about exciting SCIRP-funded research. This is an excellent place to find out what the SCIRP program is really about. The next resource is the CDMRP listservs. Signing up for our emails will get you on the list so that you're one of the first people to learn about upcoming funding opportunities. And the best part is that you can select what programs or research areas you're interested in. So you should only receive emails that are relevant to your areas of interest. I did mention that the SCIRP program announcements for FY22 are live, so you can check them out on eBRAP or grants.gov. This is a screenshot of eBRAP, and if you click on SCIRP, you'll be able to select the program announcement for the funding mechanisms you're interested in. Something else, if you don't know which mechanism is right for you, you can click the link that says synopsis of SCIRP award mechanisms. This will give you a PDF that has short synopses and key elements of the funding mechanisms, so you can quickly compare each mechanism to one another. CDMRP also has a web series we produce that has tips and tricks for applying to certain funding mechanisms, and some of these may be of interest to you. And finally, if you have questions, who can you contact? Well, like any answer that the DoD will give, it's going to depend. If you need technical support or have submission questions or issues, you'll want to reach out to the eBRAP help desk. They can walk you through the submission process and answer any questions you may have about the technical submission through eBRAP. Alternatively, if you have more complex questions, want to have CDMRP speak at an event, or want to learn more about being a peer or programmatic reviewer, you're going to want to contact the CDMRP Public Affairs mailbox for those. And with that, I want to thank you all for your interest in the Spinal Cord Injury Research Program. And I think there are a couple of last slides from the team, but then I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Melissa. That was great. So really informative. I hope everyone here was able to gather some new information from you and some tips on how to apply. So we're going to open this up for questions. But first, before we do that, I just wanted to share our screen. Jessica, if you could pull that up for us. You know, one of the questions that we get all the time for the consortium, but also your program gets as well, as where do I find these consumer consultants? So there's lots of resources out there to find people with lived experience that are willing to be advisors. So we here at NASCIC, we have a project engagement program. So if you are interested in using us to source some of your SCI consumer partners and what that might look like, we have an application process online. The link is here. But we also provide some resources for researchers on how to engage with people with lived experience. So that resource is also available on our website. So when you're putting together that consumer partnership plan, these might be great resources for you, and we invite you to come and work with us. Also, the PVA, if you reach out to Lindsay, she is through their program, they work with consumer consultants as well throughout the PVA chapters, so you can get in touch with them, as well as U2FP. Unite to Fight Paralysis just recently started a program on placing people with lived experience. So that gives you a couple of resources to find those people that you might be looking to partner with for your project. So just wanted to give you all those resources as well. So we wanted to reiterate to you all that we are recording this session. This will be posted and sent out afterwards. So if you want to share it with your colleagues, it will be available. But I'd like to open it up with questions that might be out there. And Amir, you posted a question here on chat. Would you like me to read it, or would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question directly?
Either works, however you see fit.
Go ahead. You're unmuted. Go for it.
Hi, Dr. Miller. Thanks for the great talk. I do have a question which you may have addressed it, so I apologize if I didn't capture that. So if we have a platform technology that we feel can address different organs or frankly different focus areas, how do we go about choosing which organs to focus on or which focus area? Is it best to talk to patient advocates first before applying, or is frankly the peer review process a good avenue for that?
That is a fantastic question. And I think you answered yourself in the chat the way that I would answer you, which is you're probably going to want to talk to the consumers. As much as I say that, as the program manager, I feel like I should also preface it with, you should also keep in mind what the focus areas for SCIRP are. But outside of that, I would prioritize what the people with the lived SCI experience are telling you is most important to them. And if those priorities fit within the SCIRP focus areas, great, come apply to us. But if they're driving you in a different direction, then, that's arguably what I would recommend you to follow.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Amir. And I see John Chernesky, you have your hand up. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sure, thanks, Jen. And thanks, Melissa, for a great presentation. It was great to hear a little bit more about the ins and outs of the SCIRP program. I want to say, I work at the Praxis Spinal Cord Institute here in Vancouver, and we fund research as well. Definitely not on a scale that you guys do. And we also require that persons with lived experience be partners on all of our grant applications. I'm wondering, if the SCIRP program has a mechanism for evaluating those partnerships, or trying to ensure that they're mitigating potential tokenism or tokenistic partnerships. I wonder if you could speak to that at all.
Yeah. So your question is complicated and something that we absolutely talk about at our programmatic review. I think every year that we've decided to have this requirement. And so the way that I'm going to answer it is, do we have a good method of measuring the efficacy of these community partners? On a broad scale, I'm going to say I don't really have metrics. Are these projects quote unquote better? What I can tell you is that not only are we seeing more engagement from the people with lived experience, people who are reaching out to us, but we are seeing our researchers actively utilizing things like community engagement boards or skill consultants, even when they do not need to do that. So for example, our investigator initiated research awards do not have a requirement for this community partnership, yet we're still seeing that applicants are utilizing that. We have minimum requirements for that one-on-one engagement, and investigators are actively pursuing more and more people with lived experience so that they can get broader understanding of what is driving the needs of people with SCI. And that, to me, those are all positives for me, and telling me that this is successful when researchers are without any carrot going out and engaging the SCI research community. I could not ask for anything more.
Great, thanks, Melissa. One other question I had actually while going through your presentation is, do the submitters get the feedback from reviewers? So if I'm submitting a a pre-application, will I get feedback? Or if even with a full application, if it's declined, will we get feedback so we can improve further on?
Yeah. So the applicants do get feedback. They do receive a summary statement, but that's only for the review that was done for the scientific peer review for a full application. So they would not receive feedback at the pre-app stage, or really they would not receive much feedback from the programmatic stage. These are closed meetings, and we don't really share those conversations. But the scientific peer review, the criterion based review, absolutely gets shared with the applicant so they can improve their application over time.
Okay, great. Paul, you have your hand up. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, I'm at Brain Cell Therapeutics in San Diego, and we currently have a translational program to repair neurons in the spinal cord by actually replacing interneurons of 2 different types. And we're working on a GMP process in order to move that to the clinic as soon as possible. Could we apply for 1 grant to conduct translational research and a second to characterize the neurons for the GMP process?
So what I would say is there's no limitation on the number of applications that you can submit in 1 year. So can you submit those 2 applications? Absolutely. Will they fit the needs of SCIRP? That's not really for me to say. You absolutely can. But definitely look at what the intent of each mechanism is, and make sure that your projects are meeting those specific wants and needs.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. I'm just trying to define what translational means to SCIRP right now.
We use a
And we have a
very
junior
broad
investigator who does the
definition.
models, and the rest of the company is actually in the process of producing product to go into clinical trials.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what you if you're interested in learning more about what has been funded in the past by SCIRP, which may inform whether your project may fit within what we have funded in the past, all of our research projects and the abstracts for those are available on the CDMRP website. So you can try to identify whether whether a project similar to what you're proposing has been funded in the past, and under what mechanism was it funded.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Paul. One other question I had that might dovetail off of what Amir was asking earlier is, if you have a project that crosses multiple focus areas, that it could go in either one of them, or do we have to choose a primary? And can we choose a secondary? What's the thinking in terms of the SCIRP program of what investigators should use?
Yeah, absolutely. So in fact, in our program announcements, we encourage projects to address multiple focus areas. So when you put in your application, you'll actually you're required to select one focus area, because that's the bare minimum, but you are given the opportunity to select a secondary, so that if your project does hit multiple areas that SCIRP is interested in, we'll be notified of that. Great question.
Great. Any other questions from the audience? I do see John Chernesky posted a link in the chat about a tool to use for evaluating engagement partners. So thank you for that, John. And we can use that as a resource as well for all of those on the call.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Great, so we have about 5 minutes left. If there's no other questions, just wanted to turn it back to you, Melissa. Any final thoughts as the announcement just got off the presses that investigators should know when we're considering putting in pre-applications at this point?
So I think what's most important and what's arguably unique to SCIRP, we're not the only group that's doing it, but we are a group that is asking for researchers to engage people with that lived SCI experience early on, at the time that projects are being developed and constructed and thought up. So as you know, as these program announcements are released, now is a good time, just like you would start collaborating or start talking with your, research collaborators, start engaging your community partners, because they're going to have great information to share with you when you're trying to, design these questions and this project.
Great. Thank you for that final note and thought for the SCIRP program. So thank you all for coming. There's some great resources put out here. Again, we have recorded this session. We're going to put it out there online for you so you can further review it yourself or share it with your colleagues who are not able to attend today. We do again offer options within NASCIC to be able to find and craft your engagement and consumer partnership plan. And we're happy to help you with that. As well as really consider becoming a member. We have partner members, we have principal members and patron members, and membership is free. So please visit our website. The link was in the chat, and we hope that we can engage with all of you to move spinal cord injury research forward. So again, let's have a big applause, a Zoom applause, if you will, for Dr. Melissa Miller. Thank you for taking the time today to help us educate on the program and put in some fantastic projects this year.